Dive into the welcome. Awesome. Well, I want to welcome everybody back to session 2 of our Watershed Summit on behalf of the McCall, Donnelly, and Cascade Chamber of Commerce, the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, and Friends of Lake Cascade. My name is Gary Thompson, and I'll be the moderator today. We're going to spend the next few minutes just kind of reviewing what happened last time and a few of the takeaways, and we'll talk about what's going to happen for the rest of the day today. As Governor Little mentioned in the last session, good water quality is fundamental to prosperity in Idaho. So as we go forward today in session 2 of our 4-part educational webinar series, we're going to start building towards background knowledge for a strategic planning process to provide information for future use. These sessions are a unique opportunity for all of us to learn from specialists and watershed decision makers. The ultimate goal of these webinars is to improve our watershed water quality and our way of life here in the Valley. The expectation is that after we go back to some semblance of normal post-COVID life, we're going to get together in breakout sessions, and we can use this information and let that inform some decision making and a part of a larger collaborative process. As a recap of session 1, and I should also highlight, if you go to the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District website, the previous mentioned webinar session and the recordings can be found there. And Mackenzie, if you can you put that in maybe put it in the Q&A chat and just make that available. As a recap, our session 1 presenters highlighted some great watershed restoration concepts for us to consider. Our mayors expressed common values for clean water quality and the need for education, collaboration, and practical solutions. We were reminded that historical lessons learned are important. Reducing sediment and nutrient inputs are needed to meet state pollution goals. We need to improve our understanding of algal blooms. Modifying lake water storage levels could potentially lower water temperatures. Reducing water temperature is important for fish habitat and algal bloom management. Improved sport fishing opportunities comes with healthier water. We need to understand wildfires and how they affect water quality down the road, and we can expect increased cultural pressure on our lakes and in our forest. Overall, the feedback from session 1 was fantastic. I think people were very positive about having this opportunity to look at these issues and to be able to participate as an attendee and put their questions forward to our experts. How it's going to work today, what we've got planned. We're going to look at, we're using the Zoom webinar feature. All attendees' audio and video is muted, but you can participate through the Q&A function. As each presenter goes, or as each panelist goes, we're going to try and have some time at the end for a Q&A from the audience. If those Q&As aren't able to be answered today, we're going to get those to the experts and ask them enthusiastically to get some answers back to us that we can return to our attendees. This session is recorded for future reference. We need to thank our sponsors, the McCall, Donnelly, and Cascade Chambers of Commerce, the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, Moppin Homes, the Star News, the McCall Cascade Store, Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, Pam and Ralph Thier, and Friends of Lake Cascade. With that said, we are going to get to our first presenter, John Dixon. John, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to do a brief run on your bio, and then we'll go to you. John Dixon is a forest soil scientist with Payette National Forest, working in the McCall and Crassell Ranger districts as a hydrologist, I believe. He has served in these positions for the last 6 years and has 25 years of experience working in the Forest Service throughout the Pacific Northwest. He has a master's degree in environmental soil sciences from Oregon State University. His interest in clean flowing water continues to influence his vocational and recreational interests. With that, John, we are going to you.
Okay, thank you. Is my screen showing up good there?
It looks great, John.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present today for those folks that have organized the summit, and Gary for moderating. This is a picture off of just north of Brundage Mountain, looking into the upper North Fork Payette watershed. And as you can see, to the east there are the Salmon River Mountains, high elevation granitic peaks, and this is the headwaters to the North Fork Payette. So the general outline today I'm going to take is talk about the North Fork Payette River watershed and a delineation of what I thought was the area of interest, which is upstream of Cascade Reservoir. Then I'll look at basin characteristics and general land ownership within within the basin, and then I'll talk briefly about our forest plan and how that gives us direction through management prescriptions over a lot of across the forest. And then I'll talk briefly about land management activities that are ongoing and possible future activities that would include the North Fork Payette watershed. And then the second part of the presentation will talk about watershed condition framework. It's a methodology to rate and rank sub-watersheds. It's a national methodology, and it offers you a way to rank out watersheds on whether they're functioning properly, functioning at risk, or have an impaired function. So when I was asked to present, I was trying to at least frame the watershed basin based on what I'd heard about the concerns, and primarily it was Cascade Lake Reservoir. And so I selected an area below that using stream stats, and that captures the watershed basin upstream of that point. And you can see where I selected was just below the Cascade Reservoir Dam, and that's in the yellow on the map to the right. And this is using a stream stats, a map-based user interface, and it gives you basic basin characteristics that are interesting, as well as flow statistics for looking at discharges within this basin. So here's a few the characteristics. So the basin on average is the mean average precipitation is 38 inches a year. Now the vast majority of that comes to us in snow. I'd say 70 to 80% of that, and that's a huge storage for water that's slowly released, sometimes quickly in the spring, and then is stored in our reservoirs and lakes for recreation as well as irrigation use. The basin's kind of unique in that the Upper Payette watershed is probably some of the highest water yields on the forest, and it's due mostly to the high elevation and in granitic geology. The average basin elevation is about 6,000 feet. The highest point is Storm Peak at just over 9,000 feet. And then the land allocation is mostly covered in forest, 60%, and then lakes and ponds make up 8%, and then agriculture another 9%, and then other interests such as residential, commercial, other recreation lands make up about 23%. So one important aspect is to consider this area is the ownership of the roughly 400,000 acres. Half is administered and managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Of that half, 3/4 is managed by the Payette National Forest, and that's predominantly on the Cull District. And then the other 1/4 of that is managed by the Boise National Forest. In the valley bottom, it's predominantly private ownership, and that's in the white, and then the very light green. And then between those two, Forest Service and private land ownerships, is the state of Idaho manages about 11% of the basin. And then there's various U.S. Bureau of Reclamationists and lands, and then the rest is lakes and rivers. Um, I'm just going to talk briefly about the Payette National Forest Plan and Forest Land and Resource Management Plan. This gives us kind of direction for managing the forest, and knowing some of the background kind of will give us insight into some of the later in the presentation, some of the condition ratings that we have for our subbasins within the watershed. And so the plan gives us management goals, objectives, as resource protection methods, and desired future conditions, and provides direction on availability and suitability of lands for resource management. So the forest is divided into 14 management areas, and these are, and the two that are within the North Fork Payette, or the Payette Lakes management area, and the Kenley management area. And those are two maps to the right, and they're roughly geographically situated there. And then within those, the colored polygons on those maps are management prescription areas. And these provide direction specifically to those parcels within land parcels within those management areas. And I'll go quickly through some of those. So here again is our map on the right of the upper North Fork Payette watershed, and then a table that represents that describes the management prescription category, and they're numbered, and then they're also colored. So we've got the acres within the entire watershed and acres within national forest lands. And so these prescription categories are broad category. Excuse me. Oh, here we go. So recommended wilderness is not a wilderness designation, but they're lands that are managed for those values, and they're mostly on the higher elevation, the divide between North Fork Payette and the Salmon River, and they're also inventory roadless areas. The other two major management prescription categories are passive restoration and active restoration. And these are intended to maintain the terrestrial aquatic resources. Although you can do various management treatments as long as you maintain those resources, and particularly threatened and endangered species in their habitats. The next one is undeveloped recreation, and that is pretty much management for the roadless characteristics. And then the other two, the 5.1, restoration, maintenance, and emphasis within forested landscapes, is a category that is allowed for vegetation management with an emphasis for restoration, but it does allow for commodities, and that's primarily our eroded areas historically have been timber production lands. And then 5.2 is commodity production with a little higher emphasis on commodity production. And so of that, you can see the percentages that those two categories include the majority of that percentage of MPCs on national forest lands, and they are lower in elevation, hence more productive and accessible. And so knowing some background about how our forest plan directs our management in this area gives us some insight on what those watershed conditions would be. And we'll come back to this here later. So just touch on some current management activities within the greater watershed. And one of the biggest ones is recreation, close proximity to Donnelly, Cascade, and McCall. These areas are readily available for recreationists, camping, hiking, horse riding, motorized trail riding, skiing, snowmobiling, hunting, just to name a few, as well as grazing. And there's 3,000 ewe lambs and 3,000 yearlings that go up about mid-July. make their way through the valley, and then end up in the higher country into mid-October. There's noxious weed treatments. We're actively treating noxious weeds throughout the watershed, mostly through using chemicals and some mechanical. And then we have a little bit of vegetation management that's occurring within the Kenley area, and that's our 5.1 lands. So that's timber-based lands with a restoration emphasis. And so that's about a 3,000 acre vegetation management project with underburning and timber sales, as well as some road decommissioning restoration. And that's dealing with some of the insects and disease issues we've had locally here. And then there's some fire management. Historically, the Blackwell Corral fire happened in the headwaters, and that was in 1994. And most people know that area burned pretty hot and is recovering quite well right now. And,
hey, John.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. The background noise, the fan in your computer is making it hard to hear your voice.
Okay.
Maybe perhaps you might have to speak a little louder just so we can get a good recording.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll do that. Thanks. And then the more recent rapid fire in 2015 occurred in the Kenley Creek area also. And then there's also ongoing road trail facilities and maintenance ongoing. I was asked to kind of at least mention some of our future management land activities that will be occurring in this area. And one of them is the West Central Idaho Initiative. It's a collaborative forest landscape restoration project that covers a large area and surrounds the North Fork Payette upper watershed. It's a project over about 2.3 million acres, and 1.6 million is located on the Payette and Boise. And so over the next 5 years, there could be up to $20 million allocated through that period of time, and that's dependent upon congressional budgets. We could see that as early as next year. Activities within this area would be obviously a variety of treatments, restoration treatments ranging from vegetation treatment, restoration activities such as road decommissioning. It could include where those management areas direct us, timber sales too. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears and talk about watershed condition framework and how this applies to those subwatersheds within the North Fork Payette. The watershed condition framework focuses on improving the condition of watershed and National Forest System lands. It's a comprehensive approach, and it looks at classifying watershed condition, implementing restoration opportunities and priorities in watersheds, and tracking and monitoring the restoration accomplishments. It's a management tool that can be communicated to the public very well. It's a interface on the web, and then it can also inform shared stewardship activities as well as collaborative planning. It's a national initiative, and it's a way to provide some consistent framework on evaluating and classifying watershed condition across national forest lands. It's a GIS-based analysis, so it's fairly coarse. It's not statistical or a scientific model, but it does base its rationale on the calls of condition on a lot of models and forest plan watershed condition indicators. But it is not driven or mentioned by the forest plan, which preceded this watershed condition framework. So the analysis results in a rating of each subwatershed, and each subwatershed is at the 6th level or the 12-digit HUC. And so these are small subwatersheds within the greater North Fork Payette watershed, and they range from anywhere from 10 to 40,000 acres in size. So the framework is a 6-step adaptive management process where you classify the watershed condition in step A, you identify priority watersheds in step B, and develop watershed action plans in step C, implement watershed action plans, track them, and then monitor and verify them. And today we'll just be talking about the first step, which is watershed condition classification. So watershed condition is the state of the physical, biological characteristics and processes within a watershed that affect the soil hydrologic function supporting aquatic systems. The watershed condition classification divides or ranks these sub-watersheds into 3 classes based on their function. So they can be class 1 properly functioning, class 2 functioning at risk, class 3 impaired function. And so in the map on the right, we're looking at the kind of the user interface that is web accessible. All these links will be at the end of my presentation and available. And so this is a little outshot of the North Fork Payette watershed, and then those ratings, which will go into how we get to those ratings right now. So the watershed condition class is based on 2 processes, aquatic and terrestrial. So each one of those are broken down into 4 process groups: aquatic, physical, aquatic biological, terrestrial physical, terrestrial biological. And each of those process groups are weighted. And as you can see, the weight is 60% towards the aquatic, since this is more of a watershed-based classification. So within each of these 4 process groups, there are 12 watershed indicators. And so under the physical processes, we look at water quality, water quantity, aquatic habitat. Under biological aquatic processes, we look at the biota and then riparian vegetation. In the terrestrial side of things, we look at road and trail network and their impacts on sediment and whatnot, as well as soil conditions, and then terrestrial biological, fire regime, forest cover, range, terrestrial invasive species, and forest health. As you can see, that category there has only a 10% rating, so it really doesn't weigh in as strongly and heavily as the other 3 process groups. So here's a descriptor of each of those 12 indicators. And so the first one is water quality, and it just explains in a little bit of detail what we're looking at. And then for water quality, it's the physical, chemical, biological components of the water quality. And so for this indicator, we often look to streams that are maybe impaired based on IDEQ, Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, that have impaired waters. And then we look at water quantity. So the free-flowing natural regime that maintains the magnitude and duration and timing, and those are waters that are not that are free of any impoundments or dams.
Hey John, excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry, we've got about 2 minutes left in your presentation time, and the feedback's getting pretty rowdy on our end with the fan, and I know you can't help it. So I'm wondering if maybe we just pause your share screen and see if there's any questions you can take from the audience.
Okay.
If you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't. We can do that.
Yeah, I think we're all learning to work with these different computers and their glitches. So it's an adjustment for everyone. We're just glad you're here and willing to share your time. So let's see if there are any questions from the attendees. Anybody have any questions that John can answer in the next few minutes? Or John, too, if you want to, if there are any summative takeaways that you have, like we will have your presentation online.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so in the upper North Fork Payette watershed, the condition class, as you can see from the map, the green are properly functioning, whereas the yellow are functioning at risk, and then there's one impaired functioning watershed that's Lower Kenley Creek. Here's the run out of all the indicators and their rating. And this is all a web-based interface, so it's accessible. There's some limitations to the watershed condition class in that it is not applied to public lands. And if the watershed does go onto public lands, it's rated the same as Forest Service lands. And then here we're looking at the watershed condition class for East Fork Lake, which is a function properly, and Lower Kenley, which is impaired function. And it directly relates to those management prescription areas. 1.2 is recommended wilderness, and 5.2 is commodity lands, commodity production where we have timber sales.
Sure. All right, John, we're at your last minute. Yeah, perfect. The last slide. I'm getting a request for the links. People want to see what you've got to share. So thanks for putting that up there. And again, these links will be on our website. I've got a question for you, John, from the group, or two actually, if you have just a minute. Why don't you go ahead and stop screen sharing? We'll see if that can calm your motor down. Yeah. Okay, so the first question is regarding the announcement that Tamarack made. The announcement that Tamarack made regarding its expansion. How might this affect the quality of water into Lake Cascade, assuming there would be runoff?
I'm not too familiar with the Tamarack expansion. I know there's talk about possible Brundage expansion. That is all on us. Most of that is state lands, and I don't know if there's any expansion on Forest Service lands, but ski hills they require clearing of land, and so there's a loss of cover, which can increase sediment delivery. But there's best management practices that they'd be required to do, I'm sure, to prevent and limit that inputs to Cascade Reservoir.
Certainly. And one last question: in your opinion, what's the greatest impact from our national forest lands affecting water quality in the North Fork? I'm assuming this North Fork of Payette.
Yeah, I think there's those certain areas that have just legacy roads, and there are timber production areas, and so roads have there's a definite link between sediment production and sediment delivery, and so I would say roads and road surfaces, sediment generation, production, and delivering to streams is probably the greatest impact, I think, out there.
Excellent. Well, John, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise, and we'll have this session recorded, and we'll have your PowerPoint available to our audience on our website. So okay. Thanks again.
Sorry for running along there.
Oh, this is great. Emily Washburne will be our next presenter, and Emily, if you can, once you turn on your video when you're ready, we'll be able to jump to you. Also, for other presenters and panelists, if you do happen to have some background or feedback problems, just know that you can get some headphones, and sometimes removing that mic away from the computer itself will cut down on that background noise. Emily, I am going to see, we've got your introduction here. This is the Donnelly Seeps monitoring results. Emily Washburn joins us. She is a water quality analyst from the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, where she documents a variety of water quality data and fieldwork. Most recently, she has taken part in a study that aims to assess potential nutrient loading from emergent seeps along a section of the Cascade Reservoir shoreline. Emily, take it away.
Thanks so much, Gary. I'm happy to be here. I've been having a few little bandwidth issues, so I'm going to try to nip those in the bud and just turn off my video during the presentation, and I'll be back face-to-face during the question and answer. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. Excellent. So thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be presenting results from a Seep monitoring project. And I want to mention that this project was a collaboration between the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality and the Bureau of Reclamation. We did the field work and the Bureau of Reclamation provided funding for and completed the lab work. So to get you oriented, here's a map showing Cascade Reservoir in baby blue with Payette Lake to the north. The seeps that we sampled were located along the Lake Fork Arm, which is just to the left of the red dot that represents the town of Donnelly. Cascade Reservoir receives a lot of use. Aside from residential communities, it attracts people who are looking to enjoy its popular fisheries, as well as recreational boating and swimming. The problem here is that the reservoir is eutrophic, so it has a lot of nutrient issues and is nitrogen limited. Phosphorus levels are high, and historically the water body has been impacted by anthropogenic activities related to agriculture, forestry, and urbanization. So a good way to think of nutrient impacts to this reservoir is in terms of the Department of Environmental Quality's designated beneficial uses and the pollutants that impair them. Designating a beneficial use helps us preserve a level of water quality conducive to the activities that a given water body is valued for through the application of protective criteria. These criteria can be narrative or numeric. On top, I've got a table here showing that Cascade Reservoir is designated for salmoniid spawning, primary contact recreation, which by the way refers to activities in which the ingestion of water is likely, such as swimming, and also domestic water supply. These water bodies were all listed in a total maximum daily load report because one or more of their uses are being impaired. And when we look at the identified pollutants causing those impairments in the table below, we see that an excess of total phosphorus is common among all of them. And just really quickly, a total maximum daily load report is kind of like a water quality health plan that's trying to help us get on track for limiting the level of a certain pollutant of concern. So one specific narrative criteria that is often violated in the reservoir is the one that states, surface waters shall be free from excess nutrients that can cause visible slime growths or other nuisance aquatic growths. And this is pretty clearly violated during harmful algae blooms, which affect this area quite often in the summer. To go further back into this reservoir's history of nutrient issues, it was first put on the 303D list of impaired water bodies in 1994. This was in reaction to an infamous harmful algae bloom that occurred in 1993 and killed a number of cattle. Since then, point sources of total phosphorus have been eliminated or reduced through discharge permitting by the Idaho Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. However, intermittent monitoring since 1993 only indicates a slight decrease in total phosphorus, with all originally impaired tributaries remaining impaired and showing little to no change. Since point sources are largely under control, identifying non-point sources of total phosphorus to the system is a top priority for us. Here's a visual of the Department of Environmental Quality's reports related to Cascade Reservoir through the years. Here we're beginning with the 1996 and 1998 TMDLs that were developed because of that 1994 listing. Those reports first established a numeric target for total phosphorus in the reservoir of 0.025 milligrams per liter. The year 2000 is when the implementation plan was written up that proposed best management practices and strategies for meeting goal total phosphorus reductions. And 100% of total phosphorus point source reductions have been achieved. But as of the most recent 5-year review in 2018, we're only at 78% of our goal for total non-point source reductions. And that goal amount is about 11,000 kilograms per year. The Seeps first came onto our radar in 2019 when multiple reports came in from concerned citizens noting excessive nuisance plant growth near the 4-H Camp Beach and around the lake eastern shoreline were identified as potential contributors of nutrients. It was ultimately proposed that nearby wastewater lagoons could be leaking, infiltrating the soil and transporting nutrient-rich outflow to the reservoir via the seeps. In 2020, mounting interest on behalf of Bureau of Reclamation and DEQ resulted in funding for this exploratory study. And here I've got pictures of two of the seeps that we sampled, the two seeps we sampled, the North Seep and the South Seep. And you can kind of see a rivulet of surface flow there at the South Seep, and the North Seep was a little bit more diffuse. In the middle, I've got a picture of a saturated beach zone. So that's looking down from one of the seeps, and you can really see this kind of area of impact here as it connects with the reservoir. So our specific overarching project goals was number one, to assess the nutrient concentrations in the form of total phosphorus, orthophosphates, and total nitrogen that are entering the reservoir from the two selected seep sites and one unnamed creek site. And number two, to determine whether or not there's a connection between water emerging from the seeps and those adjacent wastewater lagoons. Here's a map of our sites in some finer detail of the area. We had 5 sampling events that took place from August to November. We sampled 2 of 4 identified seep sites that are shown here as triangles. And we sampled an unnamed creek above and below the lagoons that drains the area with the land application sites, shown here with the circles. We sampled monitoring wells above and below the lagoons, labeled with the diamonds. And we sampled one of the lagoons as well that was determined to be a good composite of all of the lagoons, as it's the main one used for storage. And now when I'm saying above and below, that's in reference to the groundwater flow path in the area, which moves from the upper right portion of the map down and over towards the reservoir. Here's another map detailing the North Lake Sewer and Water District, showing the areas used for land application outlined in yellow and our intermediate well site at the red cross. On this map, you can also see Boulder Creek, Willow Creek, and Lake Fork, which you'll remember from my impairment slide were impaired for phosphorus. The most important analytes in this study for answering our question were major common ions listed here, which we used to generate what's called a Piper plot and assess the chemical source signatures across all sites, and total phosphorus, orthophosphates, and nitrate plus nitrite as nitrogen. We also looked at E. coli levels and pH, since they both have corresponding criteria that are related to Cascade Reservoir's designated beneficial uses. We also looked at total dissolved solid summation and lab electroconductivity. And I wanted to say we did not select human waste tracers like caffeine or artificial sweeteners. One, because of how expensive they are, and also because they can quickly degrade outside of the septic system, which was a risk of getting a no detection. We also believe that there are potentially multiple sources causing this impairment, and we would have only gotten a presence absent result from those human waste tracers. So the first data that I'm going to share is the E. coli data. We were specifically looking to see if we had any samples above 406 CT per 100 milliliters at the sites that make contact with the reservoir. The reason for this is that is the single sample exceedance for primary contact recreation, and the area right near the seeps and creek are popular for swimming. So as you can see from here, we did not see any exceedances of that single sample. For pH, we wanted to see if the samples fell within the cold water aquatic life criteria of greater than or equal to 6.5 and less than or equal to 9. One sample from the creek above site falls below that, but otherwise everything is in an expected range, including at the wells, which have a lower pH. So we looked at total dissolved solids to see if there was a correlation between the groundwater samples and the seeps, as well as to use it as a general indicator of potential point source or non-point source pollution. As you can see here, the seeps had levels much closer to that of the creek, and then the wells were pretty distinct from each other, with that intermediate well having a higher level of TDS zone. We looked at lab electroconductivity much for the same reason as we looked at the TDS sum, and we saw a similar pattern. There's one major outlier for the South Seep sample event on September 15th, and I truly don't know what is going on there, so that might just be something strange that happened in the field or while collecting the sample. Moving on to nutrients, total nitrogen was in the expected range with one outlier from the creek above site. And on this particular day, there had been lots of melt and runoff, and there was a new intermittent channel connecting to our sample location, which we hadn't seen on any of our previous visits. In the creek below, most of our samples were non-detects, which is not surprising because it is very reservoir influenced and the system is nitrogen limited. We also wanted to look at orthophosphates specifically, since it can sometimes be tied to anthropogenic sources of phosphorus, which can sort of spur on nuisance plant growth. But we did not see any samples outside of the expected range. Again, the one kind of highest hit there is at that creek above, which is a little bit more of like a ditch overall than a creek. For total phosphorus, we were especially interested in seeing how the samples corresponded to the total maximum daily load phosphorus target that had been set of 0.025. And that's what was set for the reservoir and the tributaries. As you can see, this target is exceeded most of the time at both these seeps and those surface sites, being those two creeks. For total phosphorus, we were especially interested in seeing how the samples corresponded to that target. And one thing we wanted to see is we wanted to get a mass load. So what I've got here is historical tributary TP concentrations. And these are averages across all the major tributaries. And the average total phosphorus for that unnamed creek was 0.0546, which is relatively kind of within range of what we've been seeing for other tributaries. We went ahead and we used a 7Q10 flow to estimate our mass load. That's the lowest average 7-day flow from a period of 10 years. We used that mean TP value, and we got this calculation of an estimated load, 0.00072 kilograms per year. For the phosphorus loading estimates at the seeps, we were able to get an average flow, and the average flow at the North Seep was 0.00025 CFS. Average TP was 0.0508, pretty similar to that creek, and the estimated annual load was 0.011416 kilograms per year. A little bit higher, but still very low. At the South Seep, the average flow, 0.002196 CFS, a pretty similar average total phosphorus as those other two sites, 0.0598, and an estimated annual load of 0.11757 kilograms per year. So again, these aren't really high numbers, though these are likely an underestimate, since as you saw from that one picture, the seeps have a pretty diffuse area where they meet the reservoir, and we were only able to sample these kind of concentrated rivulets that were coming off of them.
Hey, Emily, sorry to interrupt you. This is a great presentation. We're cutting into Brian's time a little bit. Do you think you can wrap it up in about a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, wow. All right. And again, we'll be sure and share this online. And if people have questions for you, just kind of stay tuned to the Q&A and you can keep working with the attendees that way. Thank you.
Yep, that sounds good. And can you see this Piper plot slide right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we're going to jump to these common ions really quickly. What I wanted to do was generate a Piper plot. It looks a little bit complicated, but here's a slide showing you that what we're looking for is this wastewater signature. So I'm looking for sites that are going to fall out in the highlighted portions of that graph. And the sites that fall out there are the intermediate well, the lagoon itself, and then kind of the up-gradient well falls out. And so as we go through and we look, we see that the seeps and lagoons are pretty distinct. Seeps and wells, also distinct. The creek, we've got one creek signature. This red dot is migrating towards the middle. So that kind of makes us wonder, is there some sort of influence from the lagoons? And then we look at the well and lagoons and we see that that intermediate well, which is at that land application site, does appear to be slightly influenced. So what we go ahead and did was we used a stiff plot. A stiff plot kind of shows you the chemical constituents as a shape. So it lets you see if there's some direct correlation between your sites. And our really big takeaway here is that the lagoon does not appear to be contributing to the constituents in the creek below or those seeps, and that the creek and seep constituent concentrations are relatively dilute. And I've got those kind of circled there so you can see that connection. So our big takeaway is that site sample did not appear to be a significant source of nutrient loading to the system, although total phosphorus targets are exceeded at all sites that connect to the reservoir. So still a good candidate for continued BMPs. Wastewater effluent signature was not present in the seep or creek outflow, so those lagoons do not appear to be impacting the reservoir via these surface water sites. Looking forward to next steps, I think a really big question here is about internal phosphorus loading versus external, since it seems like a lot of point source and non-point source discharges are being brought under control. Just wanted to say a special thanks to everyone that made this possible. And I've got a moment here if there are some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is if people have questions for Emily, please put them in the Q&A. And Emily, if you can access that from your panelist window, you should be able to type a response. And I'm going to keep us trucking along with our next presenter. Michael Young is joining us. Michael is with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. He received his bachelor's degree in biology from Northwest Nazarene University in 2002 and started his career with the Idaho Department of Fish and Game in 2005. In 2017, he became the regional wildlife biologist in the habitat program assigned to the McCall Habitat District. In his spare time, he enjoys mountain recreation in the form of hunting, skiing, backpacking, angling, and hiking, often with his children. Michael, take it away. We're a little over on time, but I think you can give us the best 10 minutes of the day. I'm sure of it. So
sure.
We're going to you.
Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay. Well, I can be pretty fast. So I'm here to talk about how Idaho Fish and Game is involved in all of this. I was born and raised in Nampa, and I grew up on playing and recreating at a cabin on Payette Lake. So the water quality in the North Fork is near and dear to my heart. And I have the privilege of working in the watershed as a major part of my job. Idaho Fish and Game, we care about wildlife habitat and fish habitat, and fortunately, water quality and wildlife habitat go hand in hand. So I'm going to start with kind of the summary of our projects over the last 10 years, the last decade. Fish and Game has been involved with multiple project partners, and you'll see a slide of that later. But as you can see, we've done a lot of projects. This is total stream length, stream bank length that we've worked on. You see in the North Fork Payette, we've worked on 1.8 miles with 2 different property owners, which are listed there below. Boulder and Willow Creek spent probably the most time, and I've worked on about 5 miles of stream bank length on private ranchers and ranchettes. And then on the Gulf Fork River, we've done one project too, trying to stabilize stream banks there for a total length of 7 miles. So Emily was just sharing about how the water quality hadn't changed that much, but hopefully the small changes she saw had something to do with our projects. And then I was gonna just wow you here with our list of project partners. I won't take time to read them all, but I had this slide busy on purpose because you can see how many folks are involved in these projects. We really have a full decade worth of projects. And if we jumped over a ridge, either direction, this list would get even longer, working in the Little Salmon or in the South Fork of the Salmon watersheds. All right, so then I thought I would just share a few of our techniques and how we're helping these creeks out, how we're changing what's going on the landscape. In this case, we're working on willow revetments. We've got some students and individual volunteers here. And let me jump to the next slide and show you kind of what this process is. So a willow revetment is entirely built out of willows using the surface soil. And that picture on the left with the snow, you can see generally there's a willow structure there, a willow revetment that we built by hand. We just used the contours of the bank. And this But generally, if we have an actively eroding bank in some of the larger rivers like Gold Fork River or the main stem North Fork Payette, this process doesn't work for that. All right, let's jump forward here. Here's just another photo of a willow weaving at work in spring runoff. It's gathering sediment and it's holding that small bank there. And one last photo, this is on Boulder Creek. Just with where we have, this is got an up and down vision of the same bank. You can see a willow weaving built at the bottom, and then the structure holds and the willows continue to grow. Another major part of our techniques are just hand planting with 5-gallon containers. And 5-gallon containers are quite large and somewhat expensive, but we've learned that the amount of competition is impressive with the reed canary grass that exists in the systems, and the willows with the large roots, the root wads, they have a lot of energy in those roots, and they're able to establish. So that upper right photo, you can just see some massive willow bushes starting to form. The other thing that we have to do when planting these is plant them at the proper level. So it's really easy to drown a willow or to leave a willow high and dry. And it's sometimes almost a guessing game. We learned really quickly on Boulder Creek that on a large water year, there's so much water stored in the mountains in the form of snow and the 2 reservoirs upstream. We ended up drowning willows and drowning some of our willow weavings. So it's important to know your kind of hydrologic situation before you just jump into planting. So here's some more photos of volunteers. We've had 1,000 volunteers participate on this project over the last 10 years. We're digging our plants very deep and they grow up really quickly. Another method we employ here, you can see the vertical undercut eroding bank near us here. And rather than try to deal with that bank directly, we're just trying to reestablish vegetation in the area so that eventually these willows will just grow and take over the area and provide that root force to keep the bank stabilized. In one study I read about, someone had measured willow roots, and in clumped willows found a mile of roots in like a meter squared of willow roots, or of soil. So it's a pretty powerful force, and a lot of times what's missing is just the plants on the stream banks. Another method we employed was willow barbs. This was Bill Lillibridge's design from the Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the Strand project ahead. Don't have a clock in front of me, so I'm trying to keep it fast here. All right, so here's just a couple more photos of the Boulder Creek kind of coming back and headed towards the direction we'd like to see. This photo on the right, that's another larger project that was also designed by the Soil Water Conservation Commission, and this is a total bank reshaping at Riverfront Park in McCall. So I wanted to give you guys an aerial overview and just kind of see all the places that we've worked at. In fact, there's probably a few missing pins here, but you can see we're working region-wide trying to do something to improve the water quality and as well as fish and wildlife habitat. Okay, and then I'll just jump into a couple of the most recent projects we've worked on. This is the Cascade Strand project. When you saw that slide of all the project partners, Cascade Strand probably is at least half of those project partners. This was a big project that we worked on with the Soil and Conservation Commission and Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm going to show you a photo here of these willow barbs being created on this side channel. And one of these high school students is from Cascade High School who is helping to build this. And I happened to see him at Kelly's Whitewater Park a couple years later, and he talked about the willow barbs and how he was working there. And he said, "Michael, you wouldn't believe it, those willow barbs are holding big fish now." He's like, "We haven't seen fish like that in this section of the river ever." And he's like, "I'm catching really large trout now because of these willow barbs that we built." So we're really happy with the the results of this project so far. You can see students also working with those water jet stingers planting willow poles here in this bank. More water jet stinger willows trying to compete with that reed canary grass on the right. And then we also built a fence to keep pedestrians from accessing our bank here. Here's some of our longtime volunteers. We have volunteer regulars that some of them have volunteered longer than I've been employed at Fish and Game. And a lot of them come out project after project, so they know what they're doing. I don't have to train them again. And you can see them planting some really large 5-gallon willows in this very sandy stretch of the Payette here on the Strand project. And then I just have a couple after photos here. Before we planted here, these were just completely eroding sandy banks. The river is unnaturally wide here because it's missing its vegetation, and we're just coming back to restore that, and slowly the river will heal itself. And finally, I was going to talk about our West Mountain Road fence that we built along the reservoir. This is with Northwest Youth Conservation Corps, and I was going to go into how all this whole project came together. I know that time is short. I just wanted to mention that Valley Soil and Water and Bureau of Reclamation got together with Fish and Game, and we devised a plan to try to help keep cattle out of the reservoir as well as possible rogue ATVs. And we came up with this big project, and we're about halfway through it. We built about 3 miles of fence from Poison Creek Campground all the way down to Osprey Point. And this was this last summer, these kids building the fence for us. We had Fish and Game staff come and train on fence building. We had some of our fence experts at Cecil Andrus Wildlife Management Area come train because they do fence all day, every day. And then you can see we even made the Star News. Hopefully I haven't stolen too much of Dorena's thunder here, because she's going to talk about some of these same projects. And then I wanted to show this slide one more time because it's very impressive, the amount of project partners that we've had. And I wanted to thank Durena, Farr for the Valley Soil and Water for developing these partnerships, as well as the landowners that have not only allowed us to do projects on their property and have gotten into fish and wildlife habitat, but have also allowed us to harvest willows on their property, as well as the individuals who gave hundreds and hundreds of hours. I think Dorena's going to talk about future projects coming up. So these days, pretty much all of our projects are multiple agency, multiple partners. And so everything that I'm doing, maybe minus a few smaller projects with individual landowners, are all going to be with the Soil and Water Conservation District in Valley County. So I just wanted to let everybody know kind of what's going on in the region and what things we are doing day in and day out to try to help water quality in the system. And with
Excellent.
that, if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Again, I'm going to ask you to, if you can access the Q&A, there's one for you waiting right now. And then I'm going to verbally keep transitioning us onto our next speaker. So thank you for your presentation.
Sure. I'm going to try to get to the Q&A.
I might need to stop screen share.
There we go. Stop share. There we go. All right. Woo.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Our next presenter is Brian Reese. He's going to be talking about remote sensing, monitoring HABs with satellite data. Brian holds a master's in natural resource management from the University of Idaho. He is currently a water quality standards analyst and lead harmful algal bloom coordinator at the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. He is a valuable resource for answers to questions regarding cyanobacteria. Brian, we are going to, you've got your presentation on and you're going to be joining us verbally, I believe.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks, Gary. It must be DEQ Employee Day for poor connectivity. I was asked to give a walkthrough of the new DEQ Harmful Algal Bloom website, and HAB or HAB stands for Harmful Algal Bloom. And we have a new map resource hosted in a linked story map. We recognized a need to share the satellite data we use with the public. and I thought it best to present the technology behind the new map and give a very simplified explanation for how it works. The DEQ HAB monitoring program is a response-based program, meaning that we respond to reports of potential blooms rather than proactively monitoring. This is primarily due to the fact that we don't hire a seasonal HAB monitoring crew like we do for some of our other seasonal field work, and HAB monitoring falls on top of our surface water program staff, and it is added on top of their position responsibilities. Remotely monitoring cyanobacteria harmful algal blooms has relieved some of the workload by allowing DEQ staff to watch the progression of a bloom once it has been confirmed and see when it begins to decline. Most of our offices have 1 or 2 people who respond to reported blooms to collect the samples and monitor throughout the season. Many of the water bodies we monitor are several hours from their offices, and it takes a significant amount of time to get out and back. We have been using and testing this tool for a couple of years, and we wanted to be able to share the data with people who use our lakes and reservoirs. First off, we monitor cyanotoxins because they are potent chemical compounds that happen to be toxic to many animals and people. The data indicate that blooms are occurring more frequently and they are becoming more toxic. Ingesting cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins can have real consequences. And every year I talk with people who lose dogs and horses, but the worst are the calls and emails from parents who want to know if playing in lake water could have made their child very sick. The data we primarily use comes from the European Space Agency's Sentinel satellite program. NASA, USGS, and the EPA collaborated to develop a program called the Cyanobacteria Assessment Network, or CYAN. That they analyze the data from the ESA Sentinel-2A and Sentinel-2B satellites. The CYAN program processes the data and makes it available to the public and agencies like DEQ. The ESA data is available through their website, the Sentinel Hub Playground, and the CYAN data is available through the CYAN app in Google Play. Sorry, iPhone users. And now the DEQ website and a handful of other states' websites. Most, if not all of us, frequently use satellite images through the mapping apps and websites on our phones and in our cars. The data we use to monitor cyanobacteria blooms is collected in a very similar manner, but contains more data. Like the images we use with our GPS apps, the satellite data used to remotely sense blooms is from the visible spectrum. Unlike the imagery in Google Maps, this data is collected from discrete bands of the light that is reflected back into space from the landscape. Most of the data we use is from the Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-3 satellite projects. There are 2 types of resolutions we are concerned with. Spatial resolution, which is defined by the number of pixels in an image, just like in the digital cameras we all use, and spectral resolution, meaning the tool can define fine wavelength intervals of light. This lets us study the things on the landscape that reflect light back into space. Sentinel-2 has much higher spatial resolution with a 10 meter by 10 meter pixel versus the Sentinel-3 300 meter by 300 12 spectral bands. This means the product from each Sentinel platform has inherent limitations and that they make complementary tools. And I'll discuss this in a couple of slides. When we look at the remote sensing data, we see images like the satellite imagery in the mapping apps. However, these images are different because they rely on a combination of the different spectral bands collected by the sensors. We can pick and choose which bands of data we use and gain insight about the landscape in the image. For instance, the pigments that allow plants and algae to photosynthesize use and reflect specific wavelengths of light. Knowing what pigments cyanobacteria reflect allows us to look for them in the data. Currently, the data we use is based on the pigments in microcystis. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to use the Sentinel-2 data yourself, it's available at the Sentinel Hub Playground, and I use it all the time. This data is available year-round, and it can be used to see all kinds of information about the landscape, including snow coverage. To start using this tool, enter the location at the search box at the top right. I mention this because it's sometimes hard to find. The data shown is always from the most recent overflight. By clicking on the calendar, we can select a different date and see when the overflights occurred and when usable data was collected. The circles show when the satellites passed over this area. Light gray indicates that data was collected. Dark gray indicates that data was not collected, which usually means clouds or wildfire smoke obscured the area. There is a setting in the Effects tab, which is here, on the left for showing the date of the overflight. Next, we can use the rendering tool and select the bands we want through the custom menu. And for the sake of time, I'm going to move through this section fairly quickly. My email address is on the final slide if you'd like to contact me, and I'm happy to talk and answer questions. Using the information in this paper by Xi et al., I was able to find the target wavelengths needed to help see the cyanobacteria in our lakes. The ESA provides the spectrum we can select from. I most commonly use 1, 3, and 4, but you'll notice that in this image I used 1, 3, and 12, and filter 11 can be used as well. Regardless, the very dark or black areas in the water body indicate a low probability of a cyanobacteria bloom. Even though it can be faint, green indicates the possibility of a bloom. The cyano peaks and filters are not a perfect match, but they are close enough for our purposes. And a quick side note, last week while I was editing this presentation, I saw that there is now a preset filter based on bands 1, 3, and 4, and I would just use that. You may have seen these images from CyanoTracker. They were created using Sentinel-2 data. I suspect they emphasized the swirly green colors with photo editing software. And after first seeing these images from CyanoTracker, I started using software to enhance the colors too. And it makes the faint colors easier to see. This image illustrates the inherent spatial resolution difference between two Sentinel platforms. Because we're trying to sense the pigments in photosynthesis, we have to be aware that shoreline vegetation and aquatic plants are also picked up and can be misread by Sentinel-3 as a potential bloom. For this reason, and given the large size of the pixels, cyan works best with large waters. Looking at this image, only the dark pixels near the center of the canyon give reliable data. It would, however, be a mistake to think that we should use the sharper, clear Sentinel-2 data only, because the spectral resolution of Sentinel-3 is much better than the spectral data we get from Sentinel-2. We can use the Sentinel-3 data to estimate the population density of a cyanobacteria bloom in a lake or reservoir. And shoreline data can be useful when compared with the Sentinel-2 data, which, with its higher spatial resolution, allows us to see if the water closer to the shoreline is also green. So using the two tools with data from last September, I can clearly see in this image that there are areas with a potential bloom. However, with the Sentinel-3 data, it indicates a widespread bloom and provides an estimate of the density of the cyanobacteria population in a given pixel. Now we finally get to the website walkthrough I was asked to give today. Under the Water tab in the new DEQ website is a link to the new HAB page. The HAB page will still have the health advisory map, and it will show the active and lifted health advisories. There are two links to the story map and the new potential bloom map. There, below the image on the header, there are links to the health advisory map and the potential bloom map, and you can scroll down as well. The potential bloom map is actually two maps superimposed on one another. The slider in the middle can be moved to cover or reveal one map or the other. The arrows in the top right corner of the map expand to full screen. This is Pend Oreille Lake in North Idaho. Last week, and yes, it looks like a bloom may be occurring. The map imagery on the left is normal with satellite imagery, and the colored pixels within the lake show the new cyan data. It is important to note that ice can be misread as a bloom, although the cyan algorithms normally indicate no data with ice. To see whether or not the lake is frozen, I used the Sentinel Hub playground to see what the lake looks like. And it's not frozen. It looks like Ponderay may be experiencing a bloom. During the summer, I would let our staff know and they would investigate. During the winter, we're not concerned with recreation exposure and we won't collect a sample. I would like to know what's there, but budget and staffing constraints limit our ability to respond to every potential bloom, especially during winter. Looking at the cyan color index scale, it looks like we have a range of population densities from low thousands to around 100,000 cells per milliliter in areas along the western shore. The green, yellow, and red boxes, diamonds and circles in the key, show the population density threshold set by DEQ, the Department of Health and Welfare, and the health districts. And these are intended to keep people safe. And these thresholds are based on human health studies and Idaho data. Moving the slider to the left shows the current data with the diamond symbols, and the old data are indicated with circles. Now this is a jumble, so if we zoom in on the lake, we can see the individual pixels and the data they contain. Clicking on one of the pixels opens up a pop-up box with information and the data was collected. So for instance, in this date, it was estimated this pixel had about 143,000 cells per milliliter. You can scroll through the other dates with the arrows on the bottom right corner and see what other data was there. So with that, I see I'm just over time and I'm going to skip to the end and conclude my presentation, and I will take questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Right now, it looks like our Q&A is still wide open. So if you don't mind keeping an eye on that, and we'll be in touch if someone has a question for you. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going to our next panelist. Again, thank you for your presentation. Okay, we've got up next, we're talking about water quality funding 319 programs with Kati Carberry, Water Quality Analyst. Kati is a native Idahoan who received her Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Idaho and her master's degree in Public Policy and Environmental Planning. She has been a watershed coordinator with DEQ for over 6 years and oversees the non-point source program for Idaho's Southwest Basin. Kati is going to be discussing DEQ's 319 and State Ag BMP, Best Management Practice Grant Program, as a lead-in to Valley Soil and Water Conservation District's presentation. Kati, thank you, and okay, you can take it away.
Thanks, Gary. Can everyone hear? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Kati Carberry, and I work for the Department of Environmental Quality in the Boise Regional Office. And I oversee the non-point source program for our region, and that's Boise Southwest Regional Office. And we cover Ada, Adams, Boise, Canyon, Elmore, Jim, Owyhee, Payette, Valley, and Washington counties. So it's a fairly populated and large region. So today I was asked to talk about the non-point source funding that DEQ offers. And since I only have a few minutes, this is going to be very brief. Just kind of an overview of the 319 program and also the State Ag BMP Best Management Program, just so you know what that acronym stands for. And then Durena is going to talk more specifically about the projects that have been implemented in the North Fork Payette watershed using these funding mechanisms. So in 1987, Congress established the Non-Point Source Management Program under the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. And Section 319 was created to help states be able to address non-point source pollution. So unlike point sources, non-point source pollution in general not regulated through water quality permits. And so Congress created the non-point source program to identify waters that are affected by non-point sources and then implement voluntary management programs to control or eliminate these sources of pollution that otherwise aren't regulated. So quickly, I just want to go over what we mean when we say non-point source pollution. So non-point source pollution is different from point source pollution in that it's not coming directly out of a pipe or from a discrete place in time. Non-point source pollution generally results from land runoff and or seepage. So as the water runoff moves over and through the land, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants. And then those end up in lakes, rivers, wetlands, and groundwaters. And that's what we mean when we say non-point source. So let's see, sorry about that. So here we have some classic examples of non-point source pollution. So this first picture in the upper left, we have a situation where erosion is taking place and there's no vegetation on the landscape to help stop that dirt from running off. So as the water runs over the land, it's basically carrying mud into the nearest water body. So that's an example of a non-point source. And then in the upper right, we have a situation where cattle are grazing in and around the stream. And I'm sure most of us have seen this. Unfortunately, cattle love this area because the riparian vegetation that grows near a water body's edge is typically lush and green. But the problem is that they also leave their waste right there in the creek. So as everyone knows, cattle go to the bathroom where they're eating. And then in this third picture in the lower left-hand corner, we have runoff from row crops. So anything that is applied, such as fertilizers or pesticides, plus any loose soil, ends up in adjacent waters. And then in the last example, we have a stream where the banks are nude of any vegetation and the banks have nothing to stabilize them. So this is kind of a situation where Michael Young was from Fish and Game was talking about the eroded banks. And in this example, as the banks are eroded, that sediment ends up in the creek, making it hard for aquatic life to survive. So none of these examples of non-point source pollution are regulated by the Clean Water Act. However, each year the EPA uses that congressional appropriation to provide funding to states to implement the 319 program and fund projects that address these types of sources. So examples of projects that would be eligible to receive funding for these non-point sources include, like in the upper left-hand corner, are vegetation plantings to stop that erosion from occurring. And then there's exclusionary fencing to keep livestock out of waters. Conversion from flood to sprinkler pivot irrigation to stop that overland flow of water. And then willow and riparian plantings to stabilize banks. So those are some of the examples that you would see funded to address non-point sources. Okay, so EPA distributes 319 money to DEQ, and then we're responsible for managing the 319 grants that fund the projects to address the non-point sources across the state. So here's kind of a quick overview of some basic information about the 319 grants. So DEQ accepts applications from April 15th through July 15th. And then in October, we begin ranking all of the proposed projects across the state. And then funding for the selected projects typically begins in July of the following year. So from the time the applicants apply, it's over a year before they see that funding. Requirement. So this can be in-kind services, materials, or anything else that's spent towards the project. So now that I've talked a little bit about the 319 program, I was going to give a quick overview of the state agricultural best management funding, the BMP funding. So in the 2017 legislative session, Idaho's legislature appropriated an ongoing $500,000 from the general fund that goes to DEQ to implement agricultural best management practices. And they're supposed to be in high priority watersheds throughout Idaho. So this funding is only to be used to address non-point source pollution from agriculture. So this one's a little more specific than EPA is in that it has to go to agricultural sources. So these grants are similar to the requirements of EPA's 319 grants, except that they have a really tight turnaround. So applications can be submitted from March 23rd until April 24th. And then they're reviewed and ranked in May by DEQ. And then the selective projects are funded in June of that same year. So that's a really quick turnaround. Then once the contract is signed, the project must be completed in 1 year. And so that's a little bit difficult for most people because, you know, that means that they have to have shovel-ready projects ready to go because they only have a year to spend that money. And then like projects in the 319 program, they have a $250,000 cap, and they also require a 40% match by the applicant. And then, so really quickly, I wanted to give you a snapshot since we're talking about the North Fork Payette watershed, a snapshot of the Southwest region and where the 319 state ag funding has been spent. So this is money spent by both 319 and state funds. So this is a pie chart showing the watersheds in the Southwest region by percentage of funding each has received since 1996. So when you're looking at this pie chart, you can see that the North Fork Payette watershed has received 20% of the total funding that the Southwest region has received since 96. The North Fork Payette watershed is second only to the Lower Boise. And so I just want to point out that Valley County has been really instrumental in getting good projects in the North Fork Payette watershed. So I think this is a great place to stop and let Durena talk more specifically about the projects that they have implemented here in the North Fork. And then just lastly, I have my contact information. So if anyone's interested in learning more or has questions about our grants, I would be happy to help out with anyone who's, you know, wanting to apply or just has questions. So I encourage everyone to just contact me or reach out, because the more projects that are proposed, the better. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Kati. I want to ask you to please look at the Q&A section. There's quite a few questions for you. There's also, I believe, a new question for John and a question for Emily as well. So if our panelists could take a glance that way. I'm going to push our timing back about 5 minutes in our agenda, just so to make sure the presenters get their same allotted time. So I'm going to introduce the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District projects as our next presentation. We will have Art Troutner, Chairman of the Board, and Durena Farr, District Manager, participating. Art graduated from the University of Idaho Ag Department in 1979 with a degree in plant science. He is currently retired after a career in various farming, forest, and construction trades. 30 years ago, he began voluntary service on the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District and is currently the chairman of the board. He also enjoys volunteering for the Idaho Trail Association and Payette Forest Archaeology Crews. Durena received her bachelor's degree in economics from Boise State University and is the district manager for Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. She came to Valley County in 1991 for family and quality of life, raising kids / skiers, chickens, horses, and a large variety of other 4-H livestock projects. Durena and Art, please take it away, and let's go until 11:45. Durena, there you go.
Do we have Art on? He was opening.
Here. Okay, I'll as I'm very encouraged by this process, and that first group of folks are attending these summits, and this is what needs to be done for sure. Improving the water quality on North Fork of the Payette drainage has been and remains the primary concern of the soil district, the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, for the last 30 years. Durena, yes, I'd just like to introduce my board: Justin Florence, John Lillehog, Paul Client. Paul and I have been on the board probably the longest, and Paul definitely the longest. So soil districts tend to hold on to their members for quite a long time. That you can see that all over the state. We like what we're doing. And our associates are now Bill Leaf and Magoki. For those of you that aren't familiar with the district or what we do, the following is a short explanation. Soil districts are a subdivision of state government. They operate similar to school boards. We are a volunteer board with a professional manager, that would be Durena Farr, who takes care of our day-to-day duties. Mission, as in the Idaho Soil Conservation District handbook, is serve as grassroots representatives of landowners and the general public in our community, providing leadership and direction to bring volunteer cooperation in natural resource conservation programs. And Durena well, and this is one of our collaborative efforts on this slide, our annual forestry tour. Durena, we want to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, just
And
one other thing I wanted to cover is that the district operations are funded through the Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission through state funding that allows us our base operating allocation. We also receive contributions from Valley County and other local government and private groups that are then matched by the state commission. So we are dependent upon funds from local groups to be able to operate. And right now our main funding comes from the state commission and Valley County. So the district operations consist of two components primarily: our educational outreach collaborations and our natural resource project work. And so I'm just going to cover some of those educational outreach programs that are available to the community. Again, Art mentioned this annual forestry tour that we do in collaboration with NRCS, Idaho Department of Lands, Wildfire Prevention Associates, and then our district, Adams and Squaw Soil and Conservation Districts. So when that happens annually, last year, of course, we had to cancel. It's a May event. So we did not hold the in-person event. We have opportunities for high school students to form groups to participate in the state Envirothon contest that happens every April at the Living Waters Ranch in Chalice. And it is an amazing natural resource competition for high school students. And NRCS, Idaho Department of Lands, helps the teacher help prepare the students. And then they compete in a 2-day competition in Chalice. I'm going to go back. Okay, so in addition to the Envirothon, we have speech contests at the high school level, and that is a national themed contest that happens every year. And the students start at the district level and proceed to the division level and finally the state. We also have a history of participating with schools on resource projects. We participated in the Donnelly Elementary Pollinator Garden and their project on Boulder Creek, as well as helping with the Boulder Lake installation of the vault toilets up there. That was a joint collaboration with that classroom of 30 kids writing support letters for that grant. It just is a great way to get students involved. We have these opportunities available, and we'd really like you educators to reach out to the district to develop those. This was a fall project of planting pollinator plugs on the strand, and as well as the FFA class building the pollinator hotels and installing them on the strand. The poster contest historically has been for 4th through 6th grade. This year we expanded it to include 7th graders. And this was with the Donnelly Public Library after school program participated 1 year with this as well. So we have lots of opportunities. I know with Barbara Morgan Elementary, we published a pamphlet they designed, and we included that in our newsletter outreach to 1,000 landowners in Valley County. So we'd like to see another project with that Barbara Morgan Elementary. Okay, I'll go back to Art and have him talk about our actual natural resource projects.
So thank you, Durena. Yes, so we have our education component and projects, and our second component would be projects that address water quality, soil erosion, and forest issues in the drainage. Our cooperators include cities of Donnelly, Cascade, McCall, and federal and state agencies, and a diverse interest groups such as landowners, irrigation districts, schools, trout unlimited fishing volunteers, and others. The district is non-regulatory in nature, and our programs are offered to interested parties on a voluntary basis. Did you want to discuss the project funding a little bit, Durena?
Sure. So the district is very dependent upon the grants that we're able to access. And our most successful partnership has been with IDEQ for the 319 cost share grants, which we have been able to access virtually nonstop over the last 20 years, I would say. So I know it's been the primary source of my work and funding for these natural resource projects since I started in 2016. Next would be the state NPS grants, and that was the first time that we've accessed that, at least it's the first time I accessed that grant, and that was what the West Mountain Fencing Project was utilized, and we're hoping to access that grant again. We'll at least apply for it for the south end of Lake Cascade. We also work closely with NRCS, referring landowners to NRCS for their EQIP funding program. So we work closely with that agency to accomplish what landowner needs have for high tunnel, for fencing, for offsite water. So we're hoping to have some of those demonstration projects in the near future with the offsite water. We do have available the Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission ag loans. I myself have not accessed that, but it is something that the district has accessed in the past. And then again, our joint efforts to secure vault facilities up at Boulder Lake, that was a district initiated grant with the Idaho State Parks Recreational Trail Grant. And then we also participate with the Southwest RC&D, and they have a great access to grants and lots of information and support. And then Trout Unlimited has been really generous on projects that we've undertaken, both with volunteer labor and with funds to make special things happen. This picture just is, sorry, real quick, this picture is a project that was for Little Trout Creek and repairing fencing that was just completed.
Thank you. As I was saying, our programs are offered to interested parties on a voluntary basis. And as you can see, we administer a wide variety of programs and water quality issues. Our participation is incentivized by cost sharing on many of these. As you can see, there are a lot of places where we get money, and the partner, and a lot of it is 40, I think it was 40 for 3 projects, 40% that the project instigator landowner has to come up with. This is a Long Gulch photo of a road project that drainage problem that goes directly into the Seeps River and then on into the South Fork of the Salmon and affects spawning beds. And this is when we've just got some grant money for to try to alleviate some of these problems.
And many of our projects are, the district is able to participate in just a small way. Some of these are very large projects like the Riverfront Park and the Long Gulch Improvement Project. Those required big commitments from Forest Service, NESPERS, and the district was able to contribute some from our 319 grants. So it's these collaborations that keep the groups informing one another on what needs are happening in the watershed. So again, no matter how large or small the project is, we appreciate being contacted and included. So this is just an example of a large project that we were a small contributor on, but very valuable for everyone to be able to add what they can to these projects. This is another project that we took on for the city of Donnelly, was our partner, with a failing retaining wall at the Donnelly boat dock area. So we were able to contribute the 60% of the cost of this, plus the engineering services to get this project installed. And this is the completed project. Although none of these projects are ever truly completed, we visit them regularly. Michael Young and Idaho Fish and Game contributed plants to add to this area, just to continue making sure that the projects are getting established and that they're maintained. These load reductions are significant on this project. Like I said, this was another large project that we were just a small contributor to, but it's ongoing. When we had some excess plants to be planted this fall, we were able to direct them to back to the Riverfront Park project to continue getting this project and banks established. And again, that was a collaboration with Michael Young and Idaho Fish and Game, where they are really great partner for us because they just make things happen. So we really appreciate that. And again, if you look at the bottom of the screen, that does have the load reductions that are calculated by Amanda Labe at Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. And those are something that these projects are evaluated on when they're funded. They look at those load reductions and the cost of achieving those. Michael Young with Idaho Fish and Game spoke about the fencing project, and that was again a great collaboration with USBR, Idaho Fish and Game, and the Northwest Conservation Corps. And we had a crew come in. Again, the load reductions there noted on the right. One of the things that was so great about this project, I want to touch on real quick. How am I? Oh, we got 9 seconds. So we better skip that. But the great collaboration on this is that this group came in, they got their Sawyer certification. Landowners got their, they were hugely excited about this project with the fire mitigation along the reservoir and the thinning that took place. So that was a great example of how the district comes together with lots of groups to make things happen. Current projects we have going on. This is a grant application process that has been completed, and we're just awaiting EPA funding to see if we can accomplish all these projects. We have the West Mountain Creek drainage which is one of 25 tributaries that drains into Cascade Reservoir. So it is a significant, each one of those is important to the overall West Mountain watershed improvements. The Heinrich Lane project, load reductions. Again, this is a partnership with Trout Unlimited, BLM, Idaho Fish and Game, with project design from Idaho Soil and Water Conservation Commission. The City of Cascade Stormwater project. This is the map that shows those reductions and what that project is looking like. That's underway currently. This is a really important project that a landowner came to us. They didn't know what to do. They had been trying to get this addressed through different avenues with no success. And it's definitely a project that we can help with that will have significant benefits to the North Fork Payette River with direct load reductions. And again, that's something that the district excels with, is having a place where landowners can come with their problems and we can bring in resources from several agencies to come up with a solution. We have an Alzar School student collaboration where the students will be able to participate with this resource solution. Again, we have many natural resource education opportunities. We can bring to the table technical resources, project engineering design from the commission, and cost share funding for the landowners. What's next? Do you want to take this, Art?
Not particularly.
Okay, so like, okay.
I can help. No, we've got to finish the fence along the south end of Lake Cascade, riparian fencing, which we got started last year, and it's off to a great start. And we have offsite water plants that we implement in several places to keep cattle out of the creeks and off the lake. There's a tracer study that's we've been discussing that will hopefully point out where there might be some failing septic systems along the lake, or if there in fact are failing, or if they're important. Way it's a way to focus these studies and monitoring. It helps us to place limited resources that we have in the right spots and efficient. And this is another photograph of the strand where the beaver dam analogs put in and improved the fishing, I guess. Not in my experience, but apparently by those that know how to fish there. And Durena, you want to sort of sum it up?
I think that's all we have. I borrowed this map from DEQ because it's a great illustration of the watershed and what all area that it does cover. So thank you. The message I'd like to bring home is just contact the district with your landowner questions and potential projects, both for ag and other landowners. So that's it. We super appreciate all of our collaborators from IDEQ, Fish and Game, BLM, NRCS. We just all really value being able to work together and provide these solutions as a district. So that's it.
Nice. Thank you, Durena. Thank you, Art. We are going to go next to Dr. Frank Wilhelm. Frank, just so you know, or Dr. Wilhelm, so you know, I'm going to push your time back. We'll go with an 11:50 start for you and give you till 12:05. Professor Wilhelm has a PhD from the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada, focused on limnology, the study of lakes. At University of Idaho, he teaches a senior class in limnology, and one aspect of his research program is focused on the dynamics of nutrients and how they lead to algal blooms. Currently, he and his students are interested in understanding and quantifying the role of nearshore disturbances from this phenomenon. Dr. Wilhelm, the mic is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Can you hear me? And is the slide up fine?
It looks good and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk here today. And as you'll notice, I have a couple of co-authors on my talk. I'll introduce them in a minute. They're my students. Just to give you an outline, so I'm going to go really fast to try and make up some time. Hopefully I don't trip over myself, but we'll give it a go. I've been modifying the slideshow as we push back further and further, although I'm an hour behind everybody. So just give you an outline, talk a little bit about the nearshore, why that's important, cover some of the basics. As I've been listening to some of the talks, I think there's a couple of basics missing. And then talk a little bit about our nearshore research, and then provide some preliminary results and then some next steps. So first off, I'd like to acknowledge our funders, especially the many private citizens that have stepped up in terms of funding the work at Payette Lake, and then also allowing us access to their properties. Without those, we wouldn't be able to do this work. Okay, here's the cast of characters that's also on the author list. So Abby and Crystal are undergrads. Abby is finished, Crystal is still with us. And then Heather is directly working at Payette Lake. And then Basile is a student in France that's been working with us. So we've heard before from both governor and then the mayors that for our resource-based industries, they depend on a viable resource. And then for water, that means high quality to support our water-related outdoor recreation, the tourism, and then for the city of McCall, the potable water that draws its drinking water from Payette Lake. So, and this is not by any figment of imagination, good water quality. These are both lakes in northern Idaho, and this harks back to some of what Brian was talking earlier about the HABs. So just to cover some basics, limnologists, we have this need to classify trophic state, and you'll hear people talk about this. So this is a continuum, and this goes from oligotrophic on the left here. That's a term meaning very few nutrients. And a good example of that is Crater Lake, Lake Pend Oreille, and Payette Lake are also in that category. Goes through mesotrophy in the middle, and then ends up at eutrophy on the other end, where the water is very green, excess nutrients. And then I want to just identify what the boundaries are that are identified by limnologists. So here are the trophic state boundaries. So for total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and Secchi depth, those are the three main ones. So total phosphorus is the nutrient that is typically limiting in fresh waters. Chlorophyll A is the green pigment in the algal cells, and then Secchi depth is the depth to which you can see a little disc that's 20 centimeters in diameter. And so these are the ones you really need to concern yourselves about in terms of Payette Lake. And then obviously Cascade Lake is on the other end. And then I provide the references at the bottom that these are based on. So eutrophication then is the presence of excess nutrients that stimulate this aquatic plant growth. And there are two states. On the left, you can see a picture that is macrophyte dominated, so big plants, but very clear water. And then on the right-hand side, you can see turbid water that's really green and doesn't have a lot of macrophytes in it. Both of these are stable states, and they're end members of the spectrum, and lakes can flip between the two, depending what occurs. And that's also an active area of research. And then we have this cultural eutrophication, which is accelerated natural process via human activities. And so what typically takes tens of thousands of years is reduced to tens of years. And you can actually see a noticeable change in your human lifetime. And I'm getting old enough that I can start to see some of my early childhood lakes actually changing, and that's fairly disappointing. And that also, that part of that cultural eutrophication includes the recreation that we impose on lakes and our resources. So if you think about recreational activities and phosphorus, then you see this arc. So you could sit at the side of a lake as a recreational aspect or for meditation, and you're going to have absolutely no impact. You get out, you do some paddle sports, you are out on the lake, you're actually interacting with the resource. And then, sorry, whoops, you get to boating, so you can have the gentle boating, sailboating, or the mom, dad, family going out to do some fishing, so not a lot of impact. And then you get into this one that's highly controversial. You have the jet skis and the wake boats, where we've now developed technology that allows us to pull 5 to 6 foot wakes behind the boat. And those are much larger than anything our lakes see naturally. And I liken those to mini tsunamis. So here we have the wake boats, the size and type of wake that they pull. And obviously the concern is, one is the direct property damage that results when such large waves come ashore, because Alex will talk next about how long those waves are actually propagated. And then you can see there's also the increase in turbidity, and somehow, somewhere, my slides have turned themselves into a timer. So we have this nearshore area that we're really interested in, and what happens in that area. And one of the reasons, so just to define that, nearshore is also called littoral zone, typically, and that is the depth of macrophyte growth. So it's the depth to which light can penetrate, and that allows plants to grow. So that's the fringe around the side of the lake in which we're interested in when we talk about the near shore. It's also the nursery for all kinds of aquatic life, including macroinvertebrates and then fish. It can also act as a filter. So if you have abundant microphyte growth, if you have inflow to that, that can get mopped up before it hits the lake proper. So a very important aspect here. And then there's also this physical buffer where waves that come from lakeshore are actually attenuated as they move into that near shore if it has these aquatic macrophytes and is an intact near shore area. One of the other aspects we're interested in is that in large lakes, the first changes that you see occur in the near shore. And so that's particularly why we're interested in that area. If you look at Payette Lake, then you have an issue of volume here. So the near shore versus the offshore, the pelagic. So there's monitoring that occurs currently in Payette Lake. That's at the 3 main sites. And unfortunately, I don't have them on this map. But if you look at it, if you turn that map sideways, the near shore makes up a tiny little fringe of this 300-foot deep lake. And it, Payette Lake is huge. It has a giant volume. And just to give you an idea of that, this is from Paul Wood's study in '97. So here is the depth below the full pool on the y-axis, and then the volume in cubic meters and cubic kilometers across the top. And it has a volume of 0.75 cubic kilometers. So that's a kilometer by a kilometer by a kilometer, and it occupies 0.75 or 3/4 of that space. If you multiply it out, that's 750 million liters, and then billions or cubic meters, and then billions of liters. So the size of that makes it very it's a long time lag before you make changes anywhere, before they show up in the monitoring that occurs in the deep part of the lake. So hence we're interested in the near shore, where you're likely to see some changes occur early on. And the previous authors that I showed actually indicate that for large, deep, and recreationally used lakes, monitoring in the near shore is actually beneficial. So the goals of the research that we have going on at Payette Lake are, one is directly measure the sediment nutrient resuspension from waves and wakes. And then we also want to separate what's wave cost and what's wake cost. And here I'll just pause for a minute and look at what waves are. So waves are naturally occurring disturbances in the near shore that occur as a result of natural phenomena, and this is primarily wind. And then wakes, on the other hand, are the result of anthropogenic activities that we impose on the resource. And obviously these include all forms, manners of our interactions with the water and on the water. Okay, and then we're also interested in estimating loads in the near shore. And what do we mean by loads? That's the mass basically of material that's moved in or added to a lake. And if you have this cartoon here, if you take a water sample here, we analyze that water sample, and from that we get a concentration. And that is mass per unit volume. And if we take that and multiply it by the volume in liters here, then you can see the liters cancel, and that leaves us with the mass or the load in micrograms in some unit of mass. And so that's what I mean by load when we look at, or we're trying to estimate what the loads are to the water body. And then the other goal is to provide usable data for decision makers so that they can make informed decisions that are based on science. So we're really interested in how much phosphate is liberated. And then the question, obviously, the secondary question is, should we worry about that? And so the questions are, what are the types of disturbances that occur, the frequency at which they occur, what is the shoreline type that these disturbances interact with? Are there differences among shoreline types? And then finally, what is protective of water quality in the long term? And so on Payette Lake here on the left, Heather has picked 7 study sites where we're monitoring the activity, the wave activity, waves and wakes in detail over the course of 2 years. We're about a field season into that. And then at Lake CDA, we've done some work in Kidd Island Bay, and then Crystal's working at the outflow of the lake right at the Highway 95 bridge. Okay, so the first question is erosion measurements, how much material is actually moving? And Heather gets to play with some really nice equipment here. So this is a 3D scanner, laser scanner. It's the light detection and ranging, or LiDAR. And we're using that to very accurately measure the shoreline. So this thing sends out pulses of light, and it allows us to scan the shoreline. And here's what it looks like when it's set up, and it automatically rotates, it levels itself, and it rotates and gets us this point cloud. And this is what this looks like. Even though this looks like a grainy black and white, each one of those, there's tens of thousands of points on here, and each point is at sub-millimeter accuracy. So by doing these repeatedly, we can look at how much material is being lost or how much is being accreted. So on the erosion end, some homeowners have shared some incredible stories with us. The second step here used to be at the beach. So you can see there's a good 2 feet missing underneath that. And then other owners have shared with us some of the damage that's occurring where their patios are collapsing as a result of erosion. So we're interested in, when that material is moving, is it moving into the lake? And if it does, how much nutrient is it releasing into the water column? Then there's the other end of it, and that's actual accretion. So that's the accumulation of material. We had the landowner share this picture with us where you can see the rock here in a 1987 photo. And then if you look forward, this is the same picture in 2020. And right here is that same rock. So there's a detail of it. So you can see all of that sand has been naturally accreted onto that shoreline over the last 30 years or so. So the question is, as that material moves, does it move offshore or does it move along the shore? Our main concern is when it's in the water column, how much is it releasing? How much nutrient is it contributing? And how much is being released as it's moving? So we undertake a host of water sampling. There's Heather on the top left, taking samples, manual samples. We take automated samples. And then Crystal working, Heather does exactly the same thing. Take a water sample, we get the turbidity or the cloudiness as these wakes come by. We also play with some level loggers, and these are really accurate ways to measure changes in water depth. So on the y-axis is the water depth, and then across the x-axis is the time of day. And this is some data from Crystal. Starts at 7 in the morning, and you can see all day long, this thing till 2100 or 9 o'clock at night, this thing is busy, right? All of those ups and down are individual boats and wakes coming by. And then lo and behold, after 9 o'clock, when it gets dark, it flatlines. And then all we're seeing is the natural background disturbance of the waves caused by wind or general breezes lapping up on the shoreline overnight. So huge differences between day and night. And then we're doing this year round because we need to capture times when we have waves, we have wind, and then when we have wakes, and then when the boats are actually separated. So this is in late September or middle of September, and it allows us to actually see individual boats and what their effect is on the shoreline. So these are the types of data that we're gathering to try and tease apart the wave activity and the human-caused wake disturbances. Okay, so here you can see some wind-generated turbidity. This is down at Payette Lake. Right here, you can see some cloudiness in the water, and that's the result of wakes coming ashore. And we're interested in how does that occur and how do different substrates interact with wind waves to create this turbidity. And then the boat-generated turbidity, this up in Lake Coeur d'Alene, looks something like this. We have the same sort of pictures from Payette Lake, where you get that cloudiness moving out into the water column as a result of boats going by repeatedly. This is a plot of turbidity, or the amount of cloudiness in the water on the y-axis, as a function of the time of day of the over the course of the day. So it starts at 5 o'clock in the morning and it goes to night, and every 15 minutes we take samples and then we look at what happens in response to this high human activity. And as you can see, over the time of the day, that turbidity starts to increase and it never really settles down. It settles down right around lunchtime, but it doesn't come back to background levels. And then you can see when people get off work and later into the evening on long summer nights, that turbidity really increases. So our question then is, what are the nutrients that are released from that? And that's shown here. We have total phosphorus on the y-axis in micrograms per liter, and then turbidity in turbidity units across the bottom. So the turbidity that you see here that's generated, that gets translated into the phosphorus that's released. And the red line indicates the eutrophy line. So you can see as those boats go out and come by, those wakes come ashore, that turbidity increases over time. And then it also increases the total phosphorus. And we have a fairly good relationship here that is explanatory, so that total phosphorus can be predicted by turbidity. Okay, so currently we're looking at the 2020 water samples. Both Crystal and Heather are very busy in the lab currently analyzing the samples they collected. Heather's also busy analyzing the LiDAR scans. And then we're planning for the 2021 field season, and encourage you to stay tuned. We'll have more results later on. And then I won't take any wind out of Alex's sails. He'll look at the mechanics of the wakes in the water, and he'll have that in his presentation next. The best example and the overriding message I guess I'd like to leave you with is the slogan from Bonner County that they developed as part of the Lakes Commission up there, is this: avoid the shore and ride the core. And that's sometimes difficult to do, but especially with these large wakes that are being generated, wakes the size that our lakes never see naturally, is keep it away from the shore. And then with that, I hope I've made up some time, and happy to take any questions, engage in the discussion. Like I say, we're in the first year of the study, and we're still busy analyzing our samples from last year, but again, happy to entertain questions and see if I can answer them. Gary, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Wilhelm. There are a couple questions for you in the Q&A, if you can take a look at that. Okay. And then I'm going to transition on to Alex, and then we'll have a few minutes maybe for some verbal responses to questions after this.
For sure. Thanks.
So Alex is coming up next, Alex Ray. The topic is analyzing threats to water quality from motorized recreation on Payette Lake. Alex Ray is a McCall native, McCall Donnelly High School, 2001, graduate of Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, with a BA in Spanish and Geography, and recently a Master's of Environmental Management degree in Integrative Public Lands Management from Western Colorado University. He worked in trail recreation and aquatic resource management programs for the Forest Service, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and various other organizations from 2001 to 2018. Alex currently owns and operates a local recreation management consulting business. Alex, to you.
Thank you, Gary. Can you hear me okay?
I can. We've got good audio.
Okay, and I will share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Alex, you're breaking up. You might need a second to
You still
reset
see
your
my
signal.
screen and hear me?
Yeah, you're starting to break up a little bit, and we're not. There's the screen share.
Okay. It says my internet connection is unstable at the moment. Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you. Let's give it a shot, and if it starts to not come through, we can certainly like reschedule or try again, and maybe just jump into a Q&A.
Okay, yep. So here, I'll try one more time. Here's the screen sharing. Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you, and I think you should go for it.
No. Okay, thank you. So as Gary mentioned, I'm a McCall native, and I recently performed my graduate thesis research on analyzing threats to water quality from motorized recreation on Payette Lake. The reason I chose to undertake this project is because there was a lot of debate about the no wake zone was being reconsidered at that time, and I wanted to see if the 300-foot no wake zone was sufficient to protect environmental resources on Payette Lake. So I undertook 3 research areas, partly to provide baseline conditions on the lake, so these other studies like Frank's performing could have something to work off of, and to just kind of see what's out there, what are we looking at, and what are the potential impacts. So I analyzed wind wave regimes on the lake. I measured surface waves from wake boats and other motorized watercraft, and I modeled the depth influence of wake boat slip streams. The first thing I did was the wind wave analysis. The physics behind wind waves are very well established based on the direction of the wind, the amount of time the wind is blowing, and the fetch, or the amount of free water that the wind is blowing over. Payette Lake, because it's fairly small, is considered fetch limited, and the waves will only reach so big of a height because of that, no matter how hard the wind blows. These 2 graphs right here show wind blowing across 1 and 2.5 kilometer fetches at both 1 and 2 hour durations, and you can see that the graphs are very similar. To measure these wind waves, I deployed 2 wind sensors in the southwest basin of the lake, and I also gathered data from NOAA about wind conditions during the ice-free periods of the year. A normal wind wave regime on the lake, you see average heights of 2 to 4 inches. Typical storm events like we see in the summer can produce waves up to 8 inches high, and storms in wind conditions may occur at times that produce waves up to 12. What's important about these wind waves compared to boat wakes is that the wavelength of wind waves is significantly shorter than similar waves created by motorized watercraft, meaning that the wakes from the motorized watercraft are imparting far more energy on the lakeshore than these wind waves. That's important when you're looking at erosion and sediment disturbance at the near shore. The next area of my study, I looked at motorized watercraft surface waves. I deployed an underwater pressure sensor, sampling at 10 times per second to do this, and I spent many hours on the lake, mostly in the North Basin, around the cliffs area, and then some on the west side of the lake, just south of North Beach. What I found from this analysis, like a lot of other study craft out there, and specifically in regard to the 300-foot no wake zone boundary, produced a wave that was 7.75 inches high when it reached shore. When you look at the wind waves that we see, that's significantly larger than an average wind wave regime. I was able to capture a lot of wake boats operating, producing a wake that were operating within the 300-foot no wake zone boundary. I found that a wake boat operating 135 feet from shore produced a wave that was 9 inches high when it reached shore. Again, significantly larger than the wind waves we're seeing on the lake. And again, due to the greater height and wavelength of these motorized watercraft waves, the wakes produced by motorized watercraft carry far more energy than the wind waves on Payette Lake. This is also, again, important when you're looking at shoreline erosion. Not a lot of research has been done over the years on wake boats specifically, but the results that I found were consistent with data collected by researchers from Quebec and the University of Tasmania in 2018, and that was work that was performed on the Willamette River. Other studies have been done, but they've been done in very shallow water, and while the initial wave height was the same, you saw quicker attenuation in the shallower water. The next thing that I looked at was modeling of the wake boat slipstreams, or the jet of water that comes off the propeller, or the prop wash. The theoretical basis for these studies was work done in the early 2000s by researchers with Pennsylvania State University, and they validated this work in field studies for prop washes and propeller boats. I modeled numerous different boats. I gathered the initial data. I personally collected some of this data, and I also crowdsourced a lot of this data to get the initial RPM and boat speeds to produce these curves. What I found is that the slipstream has the potential to impact up to 10 meters in the water column with enough force to potentially disturb the sediments of the type that we see in Payette Lake. One thing that I controlled for in these calculations was the angle of the prop. I assumed that the boat was sitting at 0, and that as the boat went through its transition phase into planing and moved through up to a range of about 15 degrees. I determined this by, I had a device, accelerometer on a wake boat when I was under operation, and saw these angles up to 15 degrees as it moved through its surfing speed. Once I developed those models and determined how deep the slipstream may affect into the water column, I compared that to the 300-meter or the 300-foot no wake zone boundary in the southwest basin of the lake. So I divided the lake into quarter-mile transects. In each of those transects, I determined the maximum and minimum distance for the 6 and 10-meter contour depth. As you can see from these graphs, portions of the lake were shallower than 10 meters at the 300-foot no wake zone in 13 out of 20 transects. And in 10 out of 20 of those transects, the lake was shallower than 6 meters at the 300-foot no wake zone boundary. This indicates that the turbulence imparted by the model slipstreams is sufficient to disturb sediments in the size classes commonly found in Payette Lake at depths regularly encountered at or beyond the 300-foot no wake zone boundary. Putting all this data together and looking at the conclusions of this, the 300-foot no wake zone boundary likely does not provide sufficient protection against accelerated shoreline erosion and nearshore lake bed sediment disturbance. This is due to both the size of the wakes coming from the wake boats and other motorized watercraft, and the impacts from the prop wash. The second conclusion, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for regulating wake boats or other motorized activities. Every body of water needs to be independently analyzed, and relevant conclusions made towards that body of water. We have attenuation, and both of these systems need to be dealt with appropriately. And the last conclusion is that the time to act and to regulate this technology is now. The technology is always improving, and the next generation of boats is almost on the market. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's called the GigaWave. This is an all-electric boat with 2 300 horsepower motors. It's build is 35 feet long with weighing up to 30 tons and with a 28-person capacity. Their kind of tagline is a wave to make Maui jealous. They're taking pre-orders for these boats. They've already field tested some of this, and this is the next thing that we have to look forward to unless we start regulating now. Besides just a no wake zone for a lateral distance across the lake, we're seeing depth being used as a determination for no wake zone, and also weight of motorcraft, just gross weight of the boat to determine whether they're appropriate in the waterway. You know, in a lot of places we're seeing, like Lake Tahoe has a 600-foot no wake zone. A lot of places in the East Coast we're seeing up to 700-foot no wake zones. And this is partly in anticipation that this technology is only going to get better and these wakes are only going to get bigger. So that was the quick and dirty. Thank you very much. Here's my contact information. You feel free to contact me with any questions. And if you'd like to hear a longer version of this, I will be presenting for the Midwest Glacial Lake Shoreline Partnership in March. And if you contact me, I can give you more information about that presentation, and it'll be about 3 times as long as this. So thank you very much. Thank you for all the support I got from the community and the Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council to perform this research. And it's been an honor to present for this this webinar series. And
excellent. Thank you, Alex. If you don't mind, look towards the Q&A and see if there's any questions available for you to respond to. I want to go ahead and say that ends today's session. We look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks for on February 22nd at 10 a.m. to continue learning about our watershed. This session was recorded and will be posted within a few days on the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District website for public reference. We want to thank all of our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and share as I'm thinking. Okay. So you should be able to see this was today's session. Just to have it on the screen for a minute. We got to learn about the National Forest water quality programs, the Donnelly Seeps, watershed improvement projects, remote sensing. Evidently my iPhone's going out the window, and I'm gonna have to get a Google phone now so I can use that app. We've got water quality funding, the 319 programs, local programming going on through the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, wave-induced shoreline erosion, and analyzing threats and water quality for motorized recreation on Payette Lake. I definitely want to thank all our panelists for joining us today and sharing their expertise. Looking ahead to session 3 on February 22nd, we're going to look at draft legislation for Big Payette and Cascade Lakes Councils Act. We'll hear from the Payette Land Trust. We're going to look at septic systems. We're going to look at EQIP, WaterSmart, and other water quality programs, and technical assistance in the water quality loan program. And then let's see, we've got from Trout Unlimited, conserve, protect, and restore cold water fisheries and watersheds. And then we'll go on to our Q&A. Many thanks to our sponsors, the McCall, Donnelly, and Cascade Chamber of Commerce, the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District, Maupin Homes, the Star News, the McCall Cascade Store, Big Payette Lake Water Quality Council Incorporated, Pam and Ralph Thier, and Friends of Lake Cascade. If you or your agency are interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact Durena Farr at the Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. We're about, let's see here, I've got us for about 8 minutes over. I think we'll just go ahead and run until 12:30. If some of our panelists will stay around and answer any questions, we can get that discussion going. I'm going to stop my screen share. And let's see from the Q&A. We've got, where have depth-based wake zones been established? Alex, I think that's going to you. I believe you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, yeah, I was just getting to type in that question. right now that I know of, nowhere has established an actual wake zone based solely on depth. There's a number of lakes in the Midwest that have a I guess a depth advisory, but they also have a traditional surface no wake zone to go along with that. And that's really the appropriate application of that, is a surface no wake zone and a depth no wake zone, because of both of those different factors with the prop wash and the surface wake.
Thank you, Alex. We've got another one. Do you have any information on the difference between ski boats and wake boats?
Yes, I do. I collected data from all different types of motorized watercraft when I was out there. I didn't include that in this presentation just because it was I needed to be quick and it wasn't specifically relevant at this moment. But yes, I just answered that question with my email, and if you email me, I can provide you with more of my data for different types of boats. Yep.
Excellent.
I collected data on everything from jet skis to pontoon boats to water ski boats to wake surf boats. So I spent many hours in many high traffic areas on the lake out there.
Fantastic. I'm wondering if any of the attendees have any questions for our other panelists while we still have them available.
Hey Gary, this is Frank. Hearing none jump out of the woodworks, I got to run for 12:30 class here. So
certainly, well, we'll go ahead and
okay,
in today's Watershed. Thank you, Frank. Again, thank you to all our presenters and panelists. Thank you to our attendees for spending your time and joining us. And again, all this will be posted on our website, so you can follow up afterwards. Thank you for joining the conversation. My name is Gary Thompson. Also want to recognize Mackenzie Kramer, who's been working behind the scenes. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the 22nd.
Thank you, Gary.
You bet. Hey, Durena, do you want to pause the recording and then we can just hop on real quick?